The United Nations has released a report accusing Rwanda of invading the Democratic Republic of Congo. The report details Rwandan troops in Congolese territory and support for armed rebel groups. It includes eyewitness accounts, satellite imagery, and intercepted communications. This involvement has had a catastrophic impact on the Congolese people. The international community must now decide how to respond to these grave accusations. Boots on the ground, the UN report leaves no room for doubt. Rwandan troops are operating within the DRC. Eyewitnesses have provided chilling accounts of seeing Rwandan soldiers crossing the border. These soldiers, they say, are heavily armed and wear uniforms that are clearly identifiable as Rwandan military. These eyewitness accounts are corroborated by satellite images. These images, captured by UN surveillance, show military vehicles and troop movements consistent with the presence of Rwandan forces in the DRC. Additionally, the UN has intercepted communications between Rwandan military commanders. These intercepted communications provide further evidence of Rwanda's direct involvement in the conflict. The level of detail in these communications, including troop deployments and operational plans, is damning. Rwanda has denied these allegations. It claims that any Rwandan presence in the DRC is limited to a small number of troops involved in joint border patrols. However, the sheer scale of the military presence documented in the UN report contradicts these denials. The evidence suggests a coordinated and sustained military campaign, not isolated border patrols. Puppet masters. The UN report goes beyond documenting Rwanda's direct military involvement in the DRC. It also exposes Rwanda's support for armed rebel groups operating within Congolese territory. These groups, the report alleges, act as proxies for the Rwandan government. They sow chaos and instability, advancing Rwanda's interests in the region. The report highlights one rebel group in particular, the M23. This group has been responsible for numerous atrocities in the DRC, including massacres, rape, and the recruitment of child soldiers. The UN has gathered substantial evidence of Rwanda's support for the M23. This evidence includes weapons caches discovered within the DRC that contain weapons and ammunition manufactured in Rwanda. Furthermore, captured rebel fighters have testified that they received training from Rwandan military instructors. The report details how Rwanda provides these groups with logistical support, including safe havens within its borders and assistance in smuggling resources out of the DRC. The UN's findings expose a cynical strategy by Rwanda to exert control and influence in the DRC through these armed groups. Plunder and profit. The UN report sheds light on Rwanda's alleged invasion of the DRC resource exploitation. The DRC is incredibly rich in natural resources. These resources include gold, diamonds, coltan, and cobalt. Rwanda, on the other hand, has limited natural resources. The report alleges systematic plundering by Rwanda. It supports armed groups controlling mining areas. These groups force civilians to work under brutal conditions. Profits are funneled back to Rwanda. This exploitation funds the Rwandan government. This trade fuels conflict in the DRC. It perpetuates poverty and violence for the Congolese people. Section 5. A human tragedy. The devastating impact on Congolese civilians. The conflict in the DRC has had a catastrophic impact on the Congolese people. Millions have been displaced from their homes. They live in overcrowded camps, vulnerable to disease and violence. The UN report documents widespread human rights abuses. Over 5 million people have died since the late 1990s. The international community must address the root causes and hold those responsible accountable. Section 6. A chorus of condemnation. The world reacts to Rwanda's actions. The release of the UN report has been met with widespread condemnation from the international community. Governments, human rights organizations, and international bodies have all expressed their outrage over the findings of the report. Many have called for immediate action to be taken against Rwanda. The United States, a longtime ally of Rwanda, has expressed deep concern over the report's findings. The European Union has condemned Rwanda's support for rebel groups in the DRC and called for an end to the violence. Human Rights Watch, a leading international human rights organization, has called on the UN Security Council to impose sanctions on Rwandan officials implicated in the report. The UN Security Council held an emergency meeting to discuss the report. While some members called for immediate sanctions against Rwanda, others urged caution, emphasizing the need for further investigation. The Security Council remains divided on how to respond to the crisis. Diplomatic efforts and humanitarian aid. Diplomatic activity aims to resolve the crisis in the DRC. The African Union mediates between Rwanda and the DRC. The humanitarian crisis in the DRC worsens. Millions need food, water, shelter, and medical care. The UN appeals for increased funding for its operations. Section 8. Justice delayed, justice denied. The struggle for accountability. Despite the overwhelming evidence presented in the UN report, holding those responsible for the atrocities in the DRC accountable remains a challenge. The International Criminal Court, ICC, has been investigating crimes against humanity in the DRC since 2004. However, its efforts have been hampered by a lack of cooperation from some states, including Rwanda. The ICC has issued arrest warrants for several individuals accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity in the DRC. However, many of these individuals remain at large, some in positions of power. The lack of accountability for these crimes has fueled a culture of impunity in the region, emboldening perpetrators and leaving victims feeling powerless. The international community must do more to ensure that justice is served for the victims of the conflict in the DRC. This includes supporting the ICC's investigations, imposing targeted sanctions on those responsible for atrocities, and providing support to victims and witnesses. Section 9. A call to action. The urgency for international engagement and resolution. The UN report on Rwanda's involvement in the DRC is a wake-up call for the international community. It is a stark reminder of the human cost of indifference and inaction. The conflict in the DRC is not just a regional problem, it is a global crisis that demands a global response. The international community must take concrete steps to address the root causes of the conflict, including the illegal exploitation of resources, the proliferation of armed groups, and the weakness of state institutions. This will require a sustained and coordinated effort by governments, international organizations, and civil society. The people of the DRC have suffered for far too long. They deserve peace, justice, and the opportunity to rebuild their lives. The international community has a moral obligation to act. The time for empty words and half measures is over. The world must act now to end the crisis in the DRC and to prevent further suffering.